we will have high expectations of communities around the country to adapt to the challenge of economic growth and also the transition to creating clean power. But where we need to be assertive to break down the barriers to achieving it, we will do so.
The Chancellor has also confirmed she will announce the date of the autumn budget before the summer recess. Lord Cameron has resigned as the Conservatives confirm their shadow cabinet. Andrew Mitchell will become the shadow Foreign Secretary instead. Rishi Sunak will also remain leader of the Tories until his replacement is chosen. The Ukrainian government has declared a day of mourning tomorrow following one of the deadliest Russian missile strikes in months. At least 36 people were killed in the attacks that were also aimed at 2 hospitals, though Moscow denies intentionally targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure. Striking hospitals is considered a war crime under international law. Editor of the Atlantic Council's Ukraine Alert blog, Peter Dickinson, who's in Kyiv, has told LBC that's hard to prove, but a pattern is emerging.
What we can say is that there were 3 different medical facilities struck today by missiles. So, one could potentially be an accident, be a wayward strike. 3 seems like it's clearly a strategy. This has been going on for some time. There have been hundreds overall of the war, incidents of attacks on medical facilities.
President Biden has written to Democrats in Congress, refusing to step aside and calling for an end to party drama. He's faced pressure to allow an alternative presidential candidate to take his place following last month's shaky TV debate. And 2 million homes and businesses are without power and streets have been flooded as Hurricane Beryl hits Texas. It has already cut through parts of Mexico and the Caribbean. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 10 points at 81.93. The pound buys $1.28 and €1.18. LBC weather, heavy rain spreading northwards tonight, reaching Scotland and Northern Ireland by dawn. Dry and clear further north, a low of 5. Heavy and persistent rain moving northwards tomorrow. Rain will clear for England and Wales, leaving sunny spells and a few showers, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:03 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel to my left, Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator. Next to him, George Freeman, Conservative MP for Mid-Norfolk. He's the former Science Minister. To my right, Christine Jardine, the Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. She speaks for the party on Cabinet Office, Women and Equalities in Scotland. And to her right, Paul Mason, the journalist, broadcaster and author. Well, this is the first Cross Question since the general election result. Lots to talk about. Looking forward to your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first call. It's David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, panel. In last week's election, 25 million or 47% of British adults failed to register 6 million or vote 19 million. What does this say about the state of our democracy?
Well, the turnout in the election was, I think, just over 60%, 60.2%, something like that. So I'm not quite sure where the 47% comes from, because that doesn't add up, unless you're saying that there were about 8% that didn't actually register to vote. Christine Jardine, let me come to you first on this. What does that say about our country when half of us don't bother to vote?
Well, you just said 60% did turn out to vote, so almost 2/3 of people did.
It was one of the lowest for
It was one of the lowest.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, they were disillusioned with what they'd been seeing for 5 years, frankly, from both the Conservative government and in Scotland from the SNP. And there was a huge kind of... We were getting apathy on the doors, not for us, enthusiasm for us, and I'm sure the Labour Party would tell you the same, but just an apathy towards both of our governments in Scotland and a disappointment, and why should I vote for them? So I think there was an element of their voters in particular staying at home, but people who had enough and wanted change went out and voted. But I think we have to do more to repair the damage that's been done to the relationship between the public and the body politic over the past 5 years. We've got a lot of work to do, and we have to rebuild the faith that people have lost in politicians. And then hopefully 5 years from now, we'll get a much better turnout for the election. As long as we don't go down, I'm not a fan, I know somebody's going to suggest that, of the Australian system of compulsory voting.
Oh, I thought you were going to say proportional representation.
Oh no, I'll go down that road in a minute. And that is one of the things actually which might restore faith in the system, because there's a lot of people who feel there's no point in me voting because my vote won't count. Because
hasn't this election exploded that? Because we now know that there is no such thing as a safe seat.
Yeah.
Well, some of us always thought there was no such thing as a safe seat, but we do need a much better
with the 16,000 majority.
Well, yes, but I still don't think it's safe, and that would be complacency. I do think that we do need to reform the electoral system, and that will go some way to restoring faith, because if people are involved in that reform and consulted, and then they have ownership of the electoral system, I think they'll be much more interested.
Fraser.
I really don't buy this argument that either that it reflects badly on the people who didn't vote, or they should be forced to vote as they are in Australia. Let's face it, Labour was going to storm this election. Everybody knew it. I mean, we can see, and we saw in France at the weekend, when elections are tight, when the outcome is genuinely balanced, you get far higher turnouts. Look at the Brexit referendum. That was absolutely in the balance. 17 million people came out to vote for that. So, but when it's quite obvious, I mean, the British electorate are quite sophisticated, and they can see if something's in the back of the net or if it's not. And you can see also in the seats where the outcome was marginal, you do get a higher turnout than seats where it's obviously safe. And there is in some things, not very many of them in this election, you're right. But to me, one of the great things about our democracy is that voters, the politicians need to persuade people that it's actually worth going out to vote for them. Now, the higher the abstention rate is, the greater the opportunity for politicians to go out and genuinely enthuse people. And by the way, I am no great fan of the SNP, but one thing they did manage to do very successfully was energise people and transform themselves into a campaigning movement for independence, huge turnout. And, obviously this faded when you see the results of the SNP in power.
Although they did motivate Alex Salmond to vote for them, apparently, which he revealed to Andrew Marr earlier.
Yeah, I know. Well, stranger things have happened. But, but I don't think anything does or anything should force the British public to take part in the election.
Are you as a way of voting?
Are you uncomfortable at the way the opinion polls may have influenced people? Because all along they said there was going to be a massive Labour majority, which true enough there was, although they got the percentage leads completely wrong. And there'll be a lot of people who thought, well, if I know the result, what's the point of voting?
Well, one thing Australia does do, it bans opinion polls during campaigns for exactly that reason. And now, of course, we know the opinion polls, not for the first time, got it badly wrong. They were right about big Labour majority, but they were wrong to say Labour was 20 points ahead. Turns out to have been 10 points ahead. They were wrong to say that Labour was going to get 40% of the vote. Turned out to get 34% of the vote, the lowest share of the vote ever achieved by a governing party. So the polls are wrong consistently, I think, and I can't say this was a brilliant result for them. Labour did win, but a lot of things were badly whacked because of tactical voting. But I think when you look at what's just happened in France and you look at what just happened in Britain, I think that our first past the post system works very, very well. It is designed to give decisive outcomes, which we emphatically have. And by the way, I'm a supporter, by and large, I tend to vote Tory. And the Tories got whacked at this election, but I'm not complaining about the way the Westminster system worked. I think it delivered decisive results, which are rare right now, and thank God we don't have PR.
Because it is, of course, interesting, Christine, that in this election, the Liberal Democrats polled about 12% and got around 12% of the seats. Yeah,
we have worked very hard at making a system that we think is flawed work for us. Looking at how we can make it work, targeting seats and making sure we put the resources into seats that we think we can win, rather than just
it certainly worked this time.
It worked.
George Freeman.
Well, I think Dave asked an interesting question. I'm not sure about the maths, but I think Fraser's right that the public knew this was going to be a Labour majority, and many of my voters just didn't vote. But I think it was also true, I think if you look at the data, this wasn't a 97 sort of surge for Blair. It was a meltdown, of nuclear Chernobyl meltdown of the Conservative core. And I think that's the biggest story here. And the question really is the Conservative Party now going to line itself up in a suicide ring, or think hard about what the public were trying to tell us?
Well, let's not go down that route, because we might have a question on that a little bit later. Paul?
I think there was a report today saying something like 400,000 voters were turned away because of no ID.
Yeah, shocking.
That's one problem. I do think we've got to overcome that. Some either more diverse forms of ID. There's lots of forms of ID if you're old, but not many if you're young.
What about no ID at all, Paul? Isn't that better?
Well, I'd happily take that, but it doesn't look like Labour are committed to that.
Sure.
But yeah, equally well, automatic voter registration, that would be another thing. I do think, as you say, I think we've all focused on the reform deserters from the Tories, but I know many Conservative voters who would go, well, I don't like what's on offer from the Tories, there's no way I'm going to vote Reform or Labour, so I'll stay at home.
Yep.
I think Labour suppressed its own vote. I think it's actually... if I compare, as you know, I'm a veteran, of the Corbyn era, and I know what it felt like to, get off a train or a bus and see people coming down the road thinking, how will we fit them all into the field? And there was nothing like that, and I don't think Labour sought that either. So if you combine all those things with one more thing, you've both been on the doors. I've been on the doors in the local elections and in this one. What's the classic thing that happens? You go into a very poor block of flats, sometimes ex-council, sometimes private, and it's badly maintained. There's rubbish in the hallway, and people come to the door often very sick or disabled, and you say, we're campaigning. Sometimes you've got a councillor with you, and you say, is there anything we can do for you? And a lot of the time people say no. We can't think of anything you can do for us, because they've lost
hope.
They've lost not just hope, they've lost belief that politics can change the rubbish that's down in the hallway, the state of the doors and hallway, the price of the flat and the rent. They've actually lost belief that politics changes things. And one thing I hope with having a strong Labour government is that we will, and I'm a Labour Party member and supporter, that we will deliver. And you could see it from Starmer's first intervention. That is clearly high on his priority list. He wants to restore belief that politics can deliver.
And that's quite a high bar to jump, isn't it?
Yeah.
Certainly compared to the last few years, where I think you're right, people have lost hope that politicians can affect change.
I think Starmer was actually quite stung by the fact how few, not just the low voting share, but David is completely right. I mean, the turnout was appallingly low in this election. So that means only 20% of the electorate actually voted for Labour. Now, that absolutely is the smallest percentage. So when Keir Starmer stood in the steps of number 10 and was saying, I'm addressing myself to you, especially if you didn't vote for me, he knew that was 80% of the country that didn't vote for him. Never has a greater share of the country not voted for the guy as Prime Minister. So I think, I could have been wrong, but I've got a theory that he was really quite chastened and realises that he didn't really manage to win people around during the campaign, so he's going to try to do that in government by delivering for them, which is why I've actually am quite hopeful now that this will be a reforming government, because Starmer realises that people never really turned away from the Tories, but they didn't really turn towards him, and he's now got a second chance to prove, as Paul says, they don't believe promises anymore. So they need to be shown, they need to be demonstrated. And I actually think that Starmer is serious about trying to demonstrate how politics can make a difference.
Matt has got a question for you, Fraser. He says, is Fraser planning on following in the footsteps of Nigel Lawson and Boris Johnson by seeking office himself after his stint as editor at The Spectator finishes? Do you know something we don't, Matt?
I would be a dreadful MP, let me tell you. I don't, if I was to stand for, if I was to stand for somewhere that they'd find something that I said nasty about the place a long time ago or something.
Well.
But the point, I'm also big-headed enough to think that journalism, if done properly, can make a difference.
Good answer. Right, we'll come to more of your questions in a moment. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. books. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 16 minutes past 8. With me on the panel, the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine, George Freeman, Conservative MP, and Paul Mason, journalist, broadcaster and author. Christine, how's the dynamics going to change in your parliamentary party going from 15 to 72?
Oh, it's exciting. It's the biggest number we've had since 1923.
Asquith.
Yeah, 1923. That's a long time ago. And it's a fabulous number, and it will allow us to be a very strong third party, hold the Labour government to account in much the same way as we would have wanted to the Tories. And George is looking like he's desperate to say something.
Well, I'm just intrigued by the layout of the House as Keir Starmer looks across.
Yeah.
The Lib Dems will be between the Corbynistas and the Faragites. I mean, what an opposition.
Well, where are they going to sit, though? I mean, we will presumably be sitting back in our old traditional... We've got our old Whip's office back, which was ours for, 100 years, and we're back now. We will be sitting in the traditional place of the third party. So where exactly are Reform going to sit?
Nigel Farage will take the obvious Dennis Skinner seat, won't he?
Doubt that.
I think the Lib Dems will have a go occupying that.
Yeah, I don't think
it is going to be fascinating to watch, though. But there's no PMQs this week, is there?
No, we're all being sworn in on... we elect a speaker tomorrow, and then we're all sworn in Tuesday and Wednesday. But it is going to be fascinating. And you mentioned, Elaine, I've got all those portfolios. Maybe they'll be shared out.
I think you might be down to one. Because you've been a bit greedy, haven't you? You've got, 4 there?
So I've always wondered, Dennis Skinner's seat, as you was right in the front bench, you're sitting there, and if you're watching in the House of Commons, you can always see this one rebel Labour MP, always able to crack a joke, and because he's been there for so long, he was so respected, nobody ever messed with his seat.
Yeah.
No.
Now, what will happen when Parliament rises and it comes back? And Nigel Farage is going for a certain prominent seat in the front row. I mean, do you all get there before him and make sure he doesn't sit down properly? How is it decided? Because it's informal, isn't it?
Because he will have thought about this.
He will.
Well,
so will everybody else,
for any seat in the House, apart from the Treasury bench, you have to be there early in the morning, put in your prayer card, and then be there for prayers. So...
That means it's your seat for the day.
Yes.
But quite a lot of the time when the House is sitting, people gravitate. They have a natural space. I just think Farage will naturally want to go just off the mainstream Conservative bench, and he'll want to point at Keir Starmer and our leader and say they're two sides of the same coin.
Well, let's be honest, George. The House of Commons is not the private little precinct of Nigel Farage. There are 640-odd other people there. And, he has 4 MPs. Well, he has 5, 4 plus him.
4 plus him,
yeah. So he has 4 MPs. He is not going to rule the roost in the House of Commons. I think Nigel Farage... He had his campaign. He is not someone I think we should all be, any of us. We should all follow the same rules. We should all abide by the same rules. And when it comes to where we're sitting tomorrow, I'm not really going to take where Nigel Farage wants to sit.
Right, got more votes than you lot, didn't he?
Sorry?
He got more votes than you lot.
He got fewer seats.
He got 4 million votes. You got 3.5 million. You should be more respectful, maybe. Well, I'm just saying, you're talking about him in rather disparaging terms. His party was more popular than the Liberal Democrats.
Well, his party may have been more popular, but we have, under your system, more seats, and we have more influence in the House of Commons, and I think that will be what's more important over the next 5 years.
I'll make a prediction that wherever Farage starts out in PMQs, there will come a time, because it's going to get very scratchy with Russia, where we'll see far left and far right pro-Russian MPs, and they'll sit together. That's what will happen. Because it started with Galloway, and it will carry on.
Well, at least he's not there.
Yes.
I think Paul makes an interesting point. I could see Farage saying we've overstepped the mark with Putin, we should step back. And I could see, the reason I make the point I did is not to embarrass the Lib Dems, but just to say that the opposition is going to be extraordinarily mixed. There'll be mainstream Conservatives, right-wing Faragites. The Lib Dems, I don't know if you're an opposition, or I presume you're opposing the government, and the Corbynistas, who will be sitting on the
Corbynistas. I'm talking about Corbyn himself and some of the independents. It's just going to
right.
That's the.
Let's move on to a really good question from Gordon in Hampstead. He says, only Nixon could go to China. Can only Labour sort out the NHS? Paul Mason.
I hope that Labour will sort out the NHS. I think there's been a remarkably good start with where Streeting says, look, it's broken. Let's be honest about it. It doesn't work as it should. Saying that is the easy bit, because everyone has their own view of what's wrong. I mean, my wife works in the NHS, has worked in the NHS all her life. I've been an NHS husband. If you like.
Sorry, I thought Keir Starmer was sitting there for a moment. We're short out a toolmaker.
We couldn't afford Pebble Dash. But it's
like a Monty Python.
Yeah, it's the issue of the NHS. I think is, how do we put it right? We have to have a healthier population. If you're a project manager, if you're a builder, you don't start with the front end. You don't start with the kind of delivery end. You start with the foundations. The foundations are the NHS has got to start delivering healthier people. Mm-hmm. On top of that, it's got to reduce the backlog of acute appointments and regular appointments. They've just got to throw resources at that. And anybody who says you do that without extra money is joking. Sorry, there's got to be extra money found. I don't know where they'll find it from, but there has to be. But Streeting is right that the money is not in this sense, the main thing, because you could throw a lot of money at the NHS. We've gone from 7% of GDP to 12% of GDP, and it's still not working. You could throw a lot of money, but unless you reform it, but it's what are the reforms? I think reintroduction of the market is ruled out, even though Alan Milburn apparently is around advising. The market hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. You've got to deploy, as Streeting is right, technology. Technology is the great underexplored resource for the NHS. And we're on the brink of a big rollout of potential applications, AI, machine learning and big data and the rest. And I think that if it was me, I would put a lot of emphasis into winning over the population and the workforce to the idea that if we do this right, the outputs of this system will really improve, both in terms of public health and acute, curing people. So almost like the first thing is you've got to convince the 1 point something million people who work in it, because they are the most important people in delivering the change. Got to convince them that the way you're going to do it could work. They're just not convinced. After 20 odd years, including Labour's, Milburn's original reforms didn't work.
He's back?
Well, apparently he's around and advising. Mm-hmm. So you've got to convince the workforce.
Christine, obviously you represent a Scottish seat. The Scottish NHS is different from the English, but presumably a lot of the challenges are the same.
Huge.
Worse.
And last week, I was at the Science Centre at Edinburgh University, which is working on robots and artificial intelligence and how we can use them in the NHS. And yes, it is going to be important going forward, but it's not the only solution. It's part of the solution, yes. But first of all, before we do anything, we have to invest in GPs. We have to invest in getting the waiting list down. We have to invest in social care so that people can get the social care packages to get out of hospital, so we can get more people in, bring the waiting list down, get people healthy, back out to work.
But in Scotland, the money is way more in Scotland than in England. It's something like 10% per head more.
In Scotland, yeah, but it's not 10% better, believe me, Fraser.
Isn't that exactly the point, right?
That is the
you're
point.
Talking about money. The money is there.
I'm talking about spending the money better. Okay. We need to reform the GP contracts. We need to make it worth GPs while staying rather than retire because their pensions will go down. We need to do it. We need to encourage people to stay in this. We need to encourage people to stay. It needs to be addressed better, you could say. We need to encourage people who study medicine in this country to stay in this country. Artificial intelligence will help. It is an important part going forward, but it's not the only part. And what we'd like to see Keir Starmer do is have an emergency budget. Tell us what he's going to do about the NHS, because to be honest, it can't wait. The NHS and the people in it need a solution, and they need it quickly. And we can't wait until, I don't know how long Wes Streeting's proposing taking, but we can't wait for a long time for him to come up with a proposal or a blueprint or whatever. We need to have an emergency budget now to look at how we make a difference in the NHS.
But
the answer to the question is,
in the autumn,
no, he's not the only ones. They can't wait that long. We need to know what they're planning to do purely.
Well, maybe they don't know
not
yet.
The general budget.
But
well, they've had 5 years to think about it. Yeah, but
money's not the issue.
Yeah, but money is part of the issue, Fraser, because it's not being spent properly in the right places.
A budget decides the NHS, how much spending is going to be in the NHS. I think you're saying here that it's how the money is spent that's the issue.
Yeah, which is why I think you need to have an emergency budget to look purely just at the NHS and social care about how you're spending that money, whether you're spending it effectively, and come up with a proposal.
If you come back to the point we started on, I think Fraser made the point well that Keir Starmer's identified he's got to deliver. And I would, having knocked on a lot of doors, I think there are three big things people need delivery on: immigration, NHS, and levelling up. And I mean, not just in the north, but many of our towns are on their knees. They were knackered by the pandemic and then by the cost of living crisis. And I think on the NHS, I think your questioner is right. This is something only really Labour can do. They've always accused us of, the NHS not safe in Tory hands. So I think Wes Streeting is one of the most exciting appointments in the shadow cabinet.
Agree.
I was amazed this election how much of a reception there was, and I said to people, look, it's broken. Wes Streeting has said it's broken. Yeah. He's right. We're pouring money in London. It's going on a lot of people on very big salaries, top consultants in both sense of the word, in the NHS and DH headquarters. I've been a health minister, not enough coming out on the ground. And I was amazed how much people responded to that argument. And I said, look, in the Labour Party, they had a debate when they set up the NHS. Should it be local, integrated, community-based healthcare, or should it be a national health service? Well, the Bevernites won that argument, and he was fearful that it wouldn't survive. Well, it has survived. It's become a great beast. It's in danger of becoming the British Leyland of healthcare. And although I'm a great advocate of technology, I think the real key is incentives. If you said to a city or a county, if you can increase the amount of healthcare you can deliver for a certain budget, will let you keep more of the money you save and put it back in. At the moment, it's 470 organisations competing, and if you deliver more for less, if you run a really good hospital, we take money off you and give it to the person running a failing hospital. If you ran a business like that, you'd be bust, and I think we're running the NHS into a sort of British Leyland, and so I would localise.
Fraser.
I suspect that Gordon and Hampstead has something else in mind. That the sort of reforms which Labour could do, which the Tories could never do, are exactly the market-based reforms that Paul's warning against and that Alan Milburn is advocating. I think that the way the NHS is structured right now is a vast bureaucracy of like 1.4 million people, guarantees inefficiency. Inefficiency in terms of patient healthcare, which is pretty bad, cancer survivals, one of the worst in the developed world. You've also got the way the doctors are treated, which is appalling. The shifts, I mean, the lifestyle-facing junior doctors, this is not working for anybody. Now, what I think that Labour could do, that the Tories never could, is actually go back and continue the Alan Milburn revolution, the structures, the producer-provider split, to make the NHS a method of paying for services, for example, but not necessarily for providing them. To say, for example, if you've been on the waiting list for more than 6 months, you can go private and we'll pick up the bill, or something like that, to basically put patients first and the producers second. Yeah. Now, I think that the Tories always knew this sort of thing had to be done, but they never quite had the courage. They were always putting on little NHS lapel bells, had this blue van saying NHS, positioning themselves as cheerleaders rather than reformers. Now, what does Wes Streeting do? On his second hour of the job, puts out a statement saying the position of this department is that the NHS is broken. Yep. Now, this isn't a pom-pom waiver. This is somebody who is out there saying our massive majority is a mandate to reform the NHS. He is preparing for battle with the trade unions. The BMA hate him more than any Tory. Will probably try to destroy him before Christmas, and battle perhaps with his own party. When Keir Starmer, again, going back to what he said in number 10, he would govern putting the national interest ahead of party interests, and he would be governing without ideology.
And this is where we're going to see what kind of leader Keir Starmer is, because he needs to support Wes Streeting 100%, doesn't he?
He does.
It'll also be important to see what the other parties do, whether if Wes Streeting comes up with a plan which can save the NHS, whether we all do the positive thing, we all work collaboratively with them and recognise that we have to do something, or whether it becomes a party political feud again, and we have to try and avoid that, at all costs where the NHS is concerned, because we have to fix it.
That's a very good point.
Right.
I think the welfare reform, as the Americans showed, is so contentious. It can only really happen if there's bipartisan support for it. I think the same is true of NHS support.
Yes.
So if West Streeting is doing something that Conservatives say, OK, to be honest, that actually sounds a better idea, then I would like to think that the Conservative opposition would back the Labour government in this vital mission of trying to make the NHS into something which the country, the patients and its workers deserve.
You also can't do it without tackling the social care problem.
Absolutely.
So in my part of the world, in Norfolk, social care is done by the county council, which is on its knees, and all the money in the health service goes to the machines that go paying and the medicines and the hospitals. And the poor, downtrodden elderly folk of Norfolk are struggling with a system that isn't really designed to provide community care. I don't think he can mend a broken NHS without dealing with that Dilnot
We've actually had in Wales. I mean, the Welsh NHS comes in for a lot of stick, particularly from the Conservatives, and on some measures it underperforms. But you actually had in Wales a conscious and quite large pulling of the lever towards social care. That is when they took the amount of money that were given under the devolved funding formulas and said, right, we're going to throw it into social care. Now that meant that they were underperforming, for example, I think from memory, it's the classic, turning around GP appointments, and certainly it's got its own challenges in terms of being rural, as your constituency does. But when it came to shifting people out of the bit of the NHS that is shifting people out of hospital into social care, suddenly the capacity was there, or it was as there as it can be when you're talking about a largely rural country with not many transport links.
OK, well, we could talk about the NHS for the rest of the programme, and I'm sure it'll come up again in future editions of Cross Question, but we'll move on to other subjects in just a moment. But first, the news headlines at 8:32 with Amelia Cox.
LBC has been told every community is going to be responsible for adapting to the future as the government scraps a ban on new onshore wind farms. The Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Carles, says Labour has to use the mandate it's been given to make change. The Conservatives have named their interim shadow cabinet, with Lord Cameron handing in his resignation. Andrew Mitchell will take over as shadow foreign secretary. And Jill Biden says she's all in on President Biden's bid to remain as the Democratic presidential nominee. There have been growing calls for him to step aside following a shaky performance at last month's TV debate against Donald Trump. LBC weather, heavy rain spreading northwards, reaching Scotland and Northern Ireland by dawn, dry and clear further north, a low of 5 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's too funny.
Our panel tonight: Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator; Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West and responsible for half of the shadow cabinet portfolios, it seems, but not for much longer.
Not for much longer.
George Freeman is Conservative MP for Mid Norfolk, and Paul Mason, journalist, broadcaster, and author. Right, Stephen is in East Grinstead. Hello, Stephen.
Hi. Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hi.
Should the Labour government instill and insist a higher standard of politics during PMQs?
That's a fascinating question. What do you actually mean by that? Because it's obviously the Prime Minister that's speaking. It's not, well, I suppose he speaks for the whole government, but what do you want to happen?
I'd like it to be more calm, that we've got more adults in the room. I like Sir Keir Starmer to just, keep calm, keep all his MPs calm behind him, and just instill some standards.
Calmer with Starmer, George Freeman.
Yeah, good luck with that. Look, I think that the truth is that it was better before the cameras were in there. And I talked to a lot of MPs who were in PMQs before the cameras, and it was a much more discursive and honest conversation. The minute the cameras are in, it's performance art. The whips are preparing all morning. They're trying to get the snapshot. And I think that politics needs a cockpit where you are tested by the people who can smell BS better than anyone else, which is your peers. I just think it shouldn't be on television. It's like cancer surgery.
Really?
You don't really want to be watching it. Well,
you can't take it away. I mean, you can argue it should never have happened in the first place. But
you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
No,
but I don't
really
think
can't.
you can have a Prime Minister and a Leader of the Opposition come together every Wednesday and expect everyone to go, yes, that's a very good point.
No, I
It's
don't
just
agree.
going to be a cockpit. It always has been. And it's ugly for many of the public, but that is how ideas are
Yeah,
tested.
but it is watched by more people than any other part of Parliament for a very good reason, because it is a cockpit. Christine?
I think we do need a better standard, and I do think some of the antics in PMQs are pretty awful. However, I do think that the public want to see their Prime Minister challenged and the Leader of the Opposition challenged and everybody else challenged. They want to see us answer the important questions of the day, and they want to see their government held to account. And PMQs... Was it not David Cameron who said that he was amazed that when he went to America, people used to say to him, we watch your TV show, Prime Minister's Questions, because it was so popular. Yeah. And the thing is, if you get two good people at the dispatch box, then what you get is great politics, because they can argue, they can have a discussion, they can make good points.
Well, I think, Christina,
that's what we need.
The truth is, isn't it, the public also hold contrary views. They love it. It's great dust-up fun. They say they don't love it, and they say that what they like is really boring cross-examination, which is on television on the select committees, and nobody watches it. That. So I think the truth is the British public actually rather enjoy it, and then it leaves a bad taste later when they say, well, I wish our politicians had a more serious conversation.
I think some of the comments, that have been made over the last 5 years have been a bit distasteful, and and I don't think the public like that. But I think they like the challenging, and politicians being held to account. It's when you get some of the nastiness that we've seen towards some, both front benches. Then the public don't like it, because they think, well, why are we paying these people to represent us?
Paul, I think we should remember, and we haven't seen it yet, that the dynamics of this Parliament will be unique.
Yeah.
We've got. Let's label parties progressive and conservative. You've got a progressive party in government. You've got the Conservative opposition that will be split for at least a year or so until it decides where it's going. But then when it comes to, it used to be you'd go to the SNP because they'd be the third party.
Yeah.
When it comes, it'll be Lib Dems, and I would say Lib Dems are broadly Labour's allies in the progressive space. And then after them, it'll be the SNP, who are again broadly Labour's allies in the progressive space. And if it ever gets to Corbyn, you've actually got. Remember, for the last certainly 9 out of the 14 years, we've had a Conservative government that was lurching from one crisis to another, to be frank. And it was quite easy for the opposition to go in and spear them. I don't think it's going to be that easy until events start happening, of course, or fail.
Okay. I would just take one point. I don't see the SNP as progressive. In Scotland, we've always called them tartan Tories.
Well,
we don't see them as...
It would be so well run if that was true.
Stuart Hosey, maybe, but not many of them. Right, let's go to another text question from Daniel in Horsham. Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, is this really the best the defeated Conservatives have got to offer? Fraser Nelson, the Spectator loves a Tory leadership contest. You're getting another one. It's a reasonable question to ask, isn't it?
So Ella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, no, there are better options. Kemi Bednach, for example. I mean, she is the
former employee of yours.
She's my former colleague at the Spectator, yes. No, she's a member of a specocracy who will be going forward into rather than me. But those are not... Basically, right now, it seemed to be between Kemi Bednach and perhaps we're going to see James Cleverly, the former Foreign Secretary, into the fray. Perhaps Priti Patel going there as a caretaker.
There's lots of talk about
leader. Her. Oh yeah, there is. And the idea is that she would stand saying, look, my main pledge is to resign in a year's time. The party's in no fit state to choose a permanent leader, so I'm going to come along and I'm going to be a caretaker. So I'm going to sit down and do PMQs, etc. Now, the people who don't want to do this say, be careful. The first thing she'll do is let back in Boris Johnson. Because there is a fear, that it might sound bizarre, but there's several Tories who are worried about this, but there's going to be a by-election in one of these effectively Tory seats, which due to the various freaks elected Labour and Lib Dem, in that by-election, the Tories are probably going to win it, and then along comes Boris Johnson, who would dominate Parliament, and then you're going to be back to square one. Now, there are so many, the Tories are sitting here playing mental chess on so many different levels of so many different outcomes. I can't say it's going to be that particularly interesting or consequential. I think it's going to be quite some time before what the Conservatives say really matters or resonates that much. But I do think that my former colleague Kemi Bednach is a better candidate for this. By the way, Suella Braverman might even defect to Reform. She was asked several times on GB News yesterday if she would do that, and she didn't give us a straight answer. I've no idea what she's planning. It wouldn't surprise me if we actually do see some Tories defect to join Reform, because the big question for the Conservatives is whether they are going to unite the right, as it were, or whether they're going to split and just keep on fighting. It could very well be the latter.
Paul?
Well, of course, if another MP joins Reform, they breach, it's a technical thing, but they breach a ceiling for funding from the government. They get a lot more money. There's a ceiling of 5, and then once you get to 6, you get a lot of money in proportion to your vote. So there's a temptation. I think my advice to the Conservatives, I mean, I was involved in Corbynism. The weekend after we lost, I sat down and had a long think through and discussed with people who were around me, people who ended up as being part of Starmer's leadership campaign, what did we do wrong? And what we thought we'd done wrong wasn't necessarily what we had actually done wrong. For the Conservatives, the future's got to be, the key question is, that there is a logic to saying hard Brexit is not enough. We have to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, slam the doors on migration, and go down the route that effectively steals the ponies of reform. There is a logic to it. But if you're going to do it, you're going to abandon large parts of what we call the blue wall. There's not a lot of it left, and you know it for yourself. You're going to abandon what I call Tennis Club Britain, because they don't want that. That's not what Conservatives. It's not why they read your magazine. Your magazine is a hugely read paper in that demographic.
In all demographics.
Yeah, but especially there. I don't think that the classic Conservative that we grew up in. You know, when I was a teacher, I taught in a grammar school. Yeah, and I was surrounded by the classic mortarboard and that kind of world. It's not my world, but I know they're not far right. And so if you're going to go far right and out of the rules-based system, it's a huge gamble.
Okay, Christine, are there any Tory leaders or potential Tory leaders that you fear?
No. Because, I mean, we've seen the best that the Conservative Party thought it had over the past 5 years, and look where they are.
Isn't the answer Nick Clegg?
No, I won't have a word said against them. But I don't think there's. I cannot think on anyone left. There were maybe one or two who lost, but I can't think of anybody left in the Conservative Party that we would fear or that anyone would fear. And I actually think the framing of the question is quite interesting. The questioner asks, is this the best you've got? And I have to say, that's a question I heard a lot from people on the doors about various different things about the Conservative Party. Was that the best they could do? And I think that's a question that's going to haunt them for quite some time.
George Freeman.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think the Tory party in some ways is a bit like the England team. It's got some great players and it's been putting in some really terrible performances. So I think the answer is no, it's not the best. we've got, and this may not be what media channels want to hear, but I think we need to just put ourselves in a dark room for a bit. We're irrelevant for 6, 9, 12 months. I think we need to look ourselves in the mirror very honestly and ask some really big questions about why so many of the electorate have abandoned us. And I think if we get the process right, I'd rewrite the Constitution, I'd change the leadership rules, I'd be a value-based organisation, and I'd give the membership a chance to sift from all applicants down to 3, 4, 5, and then the MPs make the final decision. I think if we get that right and show we've listened, show we've really got it, then we've got a chance in 18 months when the public start to take an interest, when I think this Labour government, big majority, quite small authority, I think it'll run into the sand quite fast. And if we've been through a process, a rigorous process of really getting it, I think any one of those people is talented enough, provided we've been through that process. But if it's just an internal civil war, great, talented people will never unite a warring party. So for me, it's all about the process in the next 9 months.
Now, you have graciously ruled yourself out of the contest, I hear, today.
Definitely.
Who will you back?
Whoever takes the process seriously, and whoever most seriously and properly, and asks the questions that have to be asked, and takes this as a serious moment of renewal properly. And I think we shouldn't rush into it. I hope Rishi Sunak will caretake us through this process properly. If not him, then I hope somebody else does. And I hope that we've really gone through the process.
There's no mechanism for that, is there?
We'd have to have a conference, which is a really big conference. Frankly, no one else is going to want to come to it. We're irrelevant this autumn. A proper conference about why our members feel cheesed off, why the organisation feels like a top-down driven bureaucracy in London that spams them for money, doesn't really listen to them properly. I think we...
But you intend to take away their choice of who's leader.
No,
they're going to feel even more disempowered that way, sure.
No, because I'm going to give them a whole lot of other things as well. A proper party. If you believe in, as I do, my conservatism is rooted in responsibility, opportunity, enterprise. I can't... the Conservative Party doesn't feel like an organisation committed to living those values. And I think we could reform really profoundly, give people a whole career option, use the party as a way to train people. We could really reorganise the way the party works and lives and breathes on the ground. The reason membership is collapsing is the only reason to be a member at the moment is you get to vote in a leadership election and then your choice is rejected by the MPs. It's a broken model, and we need to get it right.
You sure you're not standing?
You obviously thought about it, George. This is your manifesto for change, right? Effectively, you're saying you want somebody else to carry it forward, but your starting point seems to be that the way that the Tories are choosing as leaders is getting the wrong results.
Yeah, I think we're just profoundly out of touch with the way society, economy, politics has changed, and we've got a moment here, if we take it seriously, to really deeply modernise. I don't mean modernise in a shallow way as a sort of progressive greenwash. I mean become an organisation that people's, the young in today's workforce say, I'm going to join the Conservative Party. It's offering me a career. It's offering me a chance to take some responsibility, to run a campaign, to learn about media. It's an incredible organisation devoted to living out its values. Not a power organisation that will abuse me and use me and have me to the belief. I'm sure
we will return to this subject in the future as well. Lots to come on Cross Question. It's 8:49.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Is written.
Right, we have Fraser Nelson, Christine Jardine, George Freeman and Paul Mason with us. Paul is in Bolton. Hello, Paul.
Hello, everybody. My question is, today we found out that Emily Thornberry, after nearly a decade of serving in the shadow cabinet alongside Angela Rayner, is back on the back benches. Her loyalty's counted for nothing. Angela can't be removed as she has a mandate, but it's accurate to say that both ladies were a big part of the Corbyn years and are associated with the left to soft left. Emily shone far more during that period, in my opinion. But anyway, Keir Starmer says that he will work with anyone when it comes to the good of the country, yet barely anyone from the left is a Secretary of State or a Minister. And even under Blair, there was people high up like Robin Cook and Claire Short. So do you all agree with me that it's wrong of Keir Starmer to snub the left of his party like this, that it's another Diane Abbott moment? And does it go against his image as a Prime Minister for all? And I just wanted to quickly say that I've actually sent an email to Emily tonight, my first ever email to an MP, asking her to consider becoming the next Deputy Speaker, because I think she'd be brilliant in that role now. Eleanor Lang has stood down.
Well, that's an interesting one. Paul Mason, this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because Emily Thornberry has been around for a long time. She was Shadow Foreign Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn, has been in Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet all the way through. What's he got against her?
I really don't understand what's happened. I mean, apparently she's not got a job despite wanting a job. That's apparent. But you know that's what's been said. But I don't accept what Paul in Bolton is saying. I don't think this is another Diane Abbott moment. I think Keir Starmer has to, remember, he hasn't. I think there's quite a big wodge of junior ministers who haven't been appointed yet, and what he's got to work out this problem. He's got 411 people, and he has to very quickly survey. There are factions. The left, is not that big, but there are different there are no regional factions. The Cornwall has 4 Labour MPs. Scotland has God knows how many, but and remember the Scottish Labour Party has, for example, a much more pro EU position than Labour nationally has. So he's got to leave himself room to put together a team that reflects the party he's got. And yeah, I'm sorry that Emily's not in it, but there's a huge number of what I would call soft left people who were in post under Corbyn and have been in shadow cabinet, who I would hope to see on the front bench this time.
George?
Well, he's obviously decided, Keir Starmer, that he needs to reassure the public, I think, that he's governing more from the Blair wing of the Labour Party than the Corbynite wing. But I think the truth is it's all about delivery. And if he's in a race, he has to demonstrate that he can change something real, having run on that ticket. And I think if he doesn't deliver 2 of immigration, NHS and levelling up quite quickly, I think his party, the mandate is quite shallow. And I think if he doesn't deliver change, people will very quickly start to peel off. I think Rachel Reeves made a big mistake today, interestingly, because of course we need more housing. But going back to the man from Moscow, or the woman from Moscow knows best, which failed in the Blair years, I think is going to trigger a lot of antigens.
Sorry, I'm not with you. The woman from Moscow.
So the Labour Party's view before we introduced localism was that London would decide how many houses you need in each district.
Well, that's been Conservative policy until last year.
No, we had a localism act which required each area to have a plan for what it needed, and then it had to.
No, but targets were set by the Levelling Up Department.
No. My point is that if you go back to what failed under the Blair years, it will fail. I was surprised she didn't say, listen, I've got a different approach. If you build more houses, you can keep more of the money, because that would be an incentive. And thirdly, Labour have just won lots of seats in rural shire seats, and there is nothing that goes down worse in pensioner belt, where people have bought a view of a leafy field, that their view becomes a view of the next ring of houses. And I think Rachel Reeves had a chance today to say, I'm going to change the way we do this, create incentives for places to keep more of the money. And I think the Treasury knows best. Top-downism, here's your number, will lead to huge backups and failure. So I think immigration and the NHS are the 2 ones where they're going to have to really deliver.
Fraser?
I do think Keir Starmer is purging the more interesting left-wing voices in his party. I'm afraid to say I think Paul's one of them. I think Paul Mason here, I'd love to see him as an MP, which he very nearly did. I'd love to see Paul give a little diversity of opinion there. But diversity of opinion is the diversity of, I dare not speak his name, in Starmer's Labour Party. He's instead got these stormtroopers who have been selected for their loyalty, and that one force alone. And Emily Thornberry, right, she wasn't exactly rebellious, but she was probably a little bit too risque for him, so off she goes. And what I imagine is he's going to do, I think he's terrified of seeing there being a sort of like AOC and the quartet, so the gang of four in America. You get some forward left-wing senators who are able to destabilise somehow the Democrat leadership. He's looked at that, he's terrified of that. He doesn't want anybody who can do the same, so he's tried to stop them becoming MPs. So we are about to see this very boring, I think, uniformity. I'm actually, to be honest, I think the Parliament would be more interesting with George Galloway in it as well. I mean, I oppose everything he stands for. But you want that place, going back to we're talking about PMQs. I mean, it may be well better behaved and maybe a little clack of voters now, but it will not be more interesting. And I do think any decent party needs that battle of ideas, that contest of opinion. And I think, I just hope Emily Thornberry speaks up more out of, she might end up as a minister or something. But, if you're not being forced to defend your opinion, if you're not being taken to task in the Commons, you will make worse decisions.
Correct.
I actually agree with that. I mean, I don't know what long-term Keir Starmer's plan, obviously, is for Emily Thornberry or anybody else, and I don't really want to get into criticising appointments or not, but I do think Fraser's right. I was taught that the most important person in any room is the one that disagrees with you, because they are the one who will show you where your plan is flawed. They will tell you where you're going wrong. And if you don't have opponents in the room and you don't have discussion, you don't have creativity, you don't have debate, then what you get is just dull, unchallenged ideas that you don't know if they're actually going to be any good, because you don't have a challenging voice in the room. So I think if Keir Starmer is going to build an effective government, an effective cabinet, the cabinet room has to have people in it who will disagree with him and will challenge everything he says. He may not like it, but it's the best for him if they challenge what he says and they make him justify it, because if he can answer their questions, then he's probably got a good plan.
And you can imagine Emily Thornberry doing just that.
Yes, she can, and that's why it would be good. I don't know if she's the right person, but somebody has to be in there in any cabinet pointing out to the Prime Minister and the people around him where they may be going wrong.
Right, let's move to our fun question. It's from Nicole in Edinburgh. What one moment will you remember this election night for? It could be something which happened to you personally or something we all saw on TV. George Freeman.
I have two. One, Liz Truss's non-appearance at her own declaration.
Slow hand clap.
And shortly afterwards, as I walked home, I was so tired that I couldn't work out if it was evening or dawn. That summer light was the same. And I observe that politics plays havoc with time. A whole lifetime goes by in a minute, and a minute can seem like a lifetime. And I walk back into that dawn thinking, what day of the week is it? What month is it? What year is it? What just happened?
I'm sure your constituents will be delighted to know that you don't know what time of day it is. Fraser.
When I saw the exit poll and the collapse in SNP votes, now for unionists like me, one of the biggest dramas, a bigger drama than who runs Westminster, is whether the country stays together. And I personally have always thought I'd rather live an eternity in a Labour-run Britain than a single day in a fractured, disunited kingdom. So that's why I'm delighted now to see that the SNP bubble, it seems, has been burst, and that it seems that the union is going to be safe. A lot harder for the SNP to say, things are terribly unfair, given how many Scots voted Labour and have got Labour. The sort of democratic deficit we used to call has closed rather a lot. So I think this is really a hugely important outcome. You've now got Labour controlling Glasgow, as they used to do once before, and I imagine the Holyrood elections will be the same. And I think the union question has finally and properly been put to bed.
Yeah. Christine?
I would agree with Fraser on that, but for me, the special moment was it was the closing of a circle. The worst moment for me in 2015 in the general election was when Charles Kennedy lost his seat. That, to a generation of Liberal Democrats, Scottish Liberal Democrats especially, was a horrible moment and seemed like the end of everything that we had worked for. So when I was in the count on Thursday night and I got word that we hadn't won it yet and there was probably going to be a recount, but we were very confident that we had won back Charles's seat. That moment, and I was just about to go on stage and I was using Charles's quote about the night of the long ski and do in 2015 when we lost all those seats. And I said that I thought that we'd gone some way to repaying the debt that we owed to Charles and Paddy and people like them who'd built the party. So then on Saturday when we got the declaration, or was it Friday's? I'm like George, I can't actually remember anymore.
It was Saturday.
When we got the declaration and it was confirmed, that was, I thought I was going to cry watching television, because the thought of Charles's seat being ours again was just pretty special.
Paul?
Well, I'm from a town called Lee in Lancashire, in Greater Manchester. It was Liberal throughout the 19th century, Labour since 1921, and we lost it in 2019. And politics there remains scratchy. Reform is now the main opposition to Labour, but we won it back. Jo Platt is now the MP for this town. I campaigned with her in 2019. I know how hard it was for both Jo and people like her, other MPs, to see the political culture of that town change. I still think there's a huge challenge to Labour in the so-called Red Wall. Reform is on the up, but I was delighted to see my hometown go back to Labour.
Well, my one memory of watching television on election night was Robert Peston doing a Jacob Rees-Mogg and just sort of lounging across the studio. But this shows how much I enjoyed election night. Now, tomorrow's panel includes the General Secretary of the TUC, Paul Novak, the Labour MP, Rachel Maskell, the former Conservative Education Secretary, Justine Greening. Thank you to all four of you for joining us tonight. Now, in the next hour, do you remember when Labour were criticising the Conservatives for letting prisoners out a bit early because the prisons were full? Well, they're now considering plans to release offenders after they served just 40% of their sentence in a bid to tackle prison overcrowding. That's what The Guardian have revealed today. Now, I think that's entirely sensible. If you've got full prisons, you can't keep putting people in prison cells and expecting that to last. So is that the right thing to do, to let offenders out early? Obviously, it wouldn't apply to very serious offenders. Is that something that you would back? And do we actually need to look at a completely new prison system where maybe only really serious offenders ever go to prison? That's what the new prisons minister thinks.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock.